We will now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for this Good Old Blades micro podcast.
Probably one of the most valuable things I've found in knife making is to do your own heat treating. However, it's not everybody's cup of tea. Mostly it's because of the expense of getting everything that you need to do it correctly, right? So in knife making, there are lots of ways to do heat treating depending on what type of steel you're using. But for most of the stainless steels, the complication arises with your austenization temperatures and holding a constant temperature until you have to quench because of the way that the steel acts, basically, right? If you want to get more scientific about everything, Laren Thomas has a heat treating book that you can search pretty easily on Amazon or Google, and you can find out just about everything you'd ever want to know about heat treating and the recipes for individual steels. But suffice it to say, if you're doing tool steels or you're doing high carbon, you can usually get away with a forge of some sort and your quench oil. You can even do some tool steels and high carbon with air, but that has to be really thin, like a thin cross section. So you can get away without an actual heat treating oven if you're doing high carbon for the most part. But stainless steels, you have to have the temperature control, otherwise it gets really painful. And that's kind of where you get into the conundrum of personal versus professional heat treating, because I think it almost goes without saying that that professional heat treating is very, very controlled. I mean, you have all of the equipment and the processes down pat with a professional heat treater. So the likes of Peter Heat Treating or Paul Boss Heat Treating. There's quite a few local companies that you can search for on Google or whatever and find them. But I really prefer Paul Farner at Paul Boss Heat Treat because they really know how to do it right, and they test multiple times to get within your target Rockwell hardness and so on and so forth. But it costs a certain amount per blade. You usually benefit from doing more than one knife at a time. So batches are usually the most cost effective, and the turnaround time is, with shipping back and forth and heat treating time, it can be 2 weeks, right? Depending on how busy Paul Boss Heat Treat is. Where I decided to do most of my heat treating in-house was because of that turnaround time. There is a learning curve to getting good heat treating. You have to pay attention to the recipes. You have to know your oven really well. It has to be a not glitchy oven that has temperature control, and you hold for an appropriate amount of time for each steel type, and so on and so forth. In addition, it doesn't really help to do in-house heat treating on stainless and things like that unless you have a Rockwell hardness tester. I know that they make files and other things that you can test steel with, but it's not the same as being able to use a penetration test like a Rockwell hardness tester to do that. And they're not cheap. On average, if you're buying new from Grizzly, they're over $1,000, I think. If you're buying used, you can usually find them under $1,000-ish, but you're running the risk of them not working, and sometimes they need to be calibrated, and not everybody is good at calibrating those machines. So you kind of run the luck of the draw on buying secondhand equipment. But again, the benefit of being able to personally heat treat is you get to decide on when you want to do it. Now, there's a lot of ovens out there. Hot Shot makes one. Even Heat makes another one. There's Paragon. It's a very popular model, and that's one I use. There's different types and prices, all the way from $1,500-$1,600 all the way up to $4,000 or $5,000. There's for stainless at least, if you don't want to wrap all of your blades in oxygen resistant foil in order to keep it from decarbing and everything, then you have to use an inert gas evacuated chamber. So basically, it has a valve on it that initially you pump out all of the air from the cavity or the body of the unit of the heat treating oven, and then you fill it with an inert gas. And then as you're doing the heat treating, it's going to maintain that pressure and everything until you're done with your heat treating cycle. And the idea, at least, is that in the absence of oxygen, nothing will decarb. So it's something to think about, because all of those things cost money. It costs money to buy all the foil. It costs money for the oven. It costs money for quench plates if you're doing air quenched steels over oil. Your Rockwell harness tester costs things. It costs it to calibrate. The electricity to run the heat treating oven costs. And the majority of what is the benefit to you is the turnaround time, or the spontaneity and agility at which you can heat treat things. So, when you're thinking about it, there is a lot of benefit to sending your material off to a trusted heat treat company and waiting the amount of time it takes, giving them a target HRC and everything, and getting back blades that are straight, that are heat treated appropriately and tested, and they don't have a ton of decarb or anything on the outside, because when they're using inert gas, it's a pretty clean process. But again, not the same turnaround time. So the cost approximately is between like $4 and $7 a blade if you're doing it in batches. If you're doing one-offs, then obviously it gets a little bit more expensive. It can be upwards of $17 a blade. It also depends on whether what the size of the blade is, lengthwise, thickness-wise, everything like that, because those are kind of factors in you sending it off. And I have sent off, when I first got into heat treating, I sent some AEBL blades off to a local heat treating company, and they totally botched the entire heat treat. It was awful. Not only did they not come back in the right HRC, but they were heavily tarnished. Like they threw it in the oven without any wrapping. There was no inert gas in it or anything, so they came back like bluer than blue, and they were pretty soft too. And it was just not a pleasurable experience. And I paid for it, but I'll never use them again. And that's why I stick with somebody reputable like Paul Boss or Peter's Heat Treat or whatever. So just think about it. Like there's always a trade-off in knife making. If you have one or two specific types of patterns, or a few that you can batch up and send to a heat treating company, and everything's pretty regular, then I would go that route. If you're doing pocket knives and slip joints and things that you want to be spontaneous about, you have to think about all of those elements that go into heat treating stuff, and whether it's worth the spontaneity component of it, or whether you just plan ahead, wait a few weeks, you're patient, and you get things back from heat treat appropriately. So that's kind of the idea. I mean, I don't know if there's really anything else to say about it, but it whether you're going to go through the investment of multiple $1,000s in a kiln and a tester and all the other equipment, and store all those things and run the electricity for them, or you're going to choose somebody that you can pay a few dollars a blade and get everything batched up where it's cost effective for you, and then get it back and just roll through those. It's kind of up to you and what you have the ability for. But at least for me, initially, I started setting everything off. And I've kind of, I will send some things off depending on whether they're more complex steels that I just don't really want to deal with. And if I do large batches, I typically won't heat treat those at home. I'll just, if I'm doing like 20 or 30 blade batches and I want to do them all at once, I'll just send them off to Paul Boss. But I hope that helps. I mean, I hope it's informative. There are lots of resources out there on the best ways to heat treat things, and there's quite a few heat treating companies out there. But if you really want to get into ovens and things, search Evenheat or Paragon or Hotshot. All three of those are very viable options, and they come in a wide array of prices, depending on the controller types and whether you want to run argon on them or things like that.